The National Desk, America's News Now.
Thousands reported dead. Major cities fall under Russian attack, but the Ukrainian people fight on.
We understand that we are fighting not only just for independence, but for our lives.
We talked to a member of the Ukrainian parliament about what he's seeing on the ground as the world watches Putin's assault. Oil reserves released around the world as prices hit levels not seen in years.
It's getting expensive. It's tough on the consumer, tough on us.
Our fact-check team looking into the president's promises to stop record inflation. How much of an impact do his words and actions really have? The Biden administration announces its plan to move past the pandemic, keeping America open. But that plan comes with a cost. Just how much more the White House is asking for. And an election usually ignored getting more attention than ever. More people running for their local school board than ever before. It isn't just mandates driving those candidates. What experts say is behind the change. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Eugene Ramirez. In this weekend edition, we take a look back at the big headlines of the week and a look ahead at what to expect. We're following 4 big stories from the week. The White House unveiling its new Test to Treat program to move the country past the pandemic. The rise in carjackings around the country causing concern. Gas prices once again breaking records, some already paying more than $5 a gallon. And the world coming down hard on Russia as it continues its assault on Ukraine. And that's where we begin, in Ukraine, where a firefight at Europe's largest nuclear power plant is causing global concern. Thursday night, a fire breaking out as Russian and Ukrainian troops battled for control of that plant. By Friday, the plant was stable, but world leaders emphasize the situation is getting increasingly dangerous.
By the grace of God, the world narrowly averted a nuclear catastrophe last night. Mr. Putin must stop this madness, and he must stop it.
Meantime, Ukrainian officials say 5 people, including 3 children, were killed in a strike near Kyiv on Friday. It's estimated at least 2,000 civilians have been killed in the conflict so far. Now, according to the UN, more than 1.2 million people have fled Ukraine for neighboring countries. The United Nations believes that by the end of this crisis, that number could top 4 million. The refugee agency saying the situation could become Europe's, quote, largest refugee crisis this century. Border crossings have been packed for days with long lines of cars and buses backed up at checkpoints. There's a constant flow at train stations as well. Ukraine and Russia have reportedly reached an agreement to allow safe passage for people to evacuate and for humanitarian supplies to come in. Reporter Ryan Smith spoke to organizations on the ground working to deliver assistance.
It's an active war zone in the opening days of a war.
Brian Stern speaks with us from a dark room in Kyiv. The lights are off, a necessary precaution, he says, to stay alive.
It's not a pleasant experience. Nobody woke up and wanted to be a refugee. Nobody woke up and wanted to be subject to the violence of Vladimir Putin's lunacy.
His team, Project Dynamo, is on the ground in Ukraine's capital city, rescuing both American and Ukrainian citizens seeking safety in a bordering country.
I woke up on Saturday, and the bridges around Kyiv were intact. Today on Monday, every bridge is blown up. So it changes the whole thing. How do I get a bus into a city with no bridges? More importantly, how do I get a bus out of a city with no bridges?
More than 500,000 refugees have now fled to neighboring countries since the start of the Russian invasion. Gut-wrenching images showing families huddled together in train stations, on the side of the road, in the cold, clinging to what few belongings they could quickly pack into a single suitcase. A UN official warns fuel, cash, and medical supplies are dwindling in this ongoing humanitarian crisis.
On the borders, they need water. The border towns on the Ukrainian side don't have water. The stores are completely out, and there's wait times above 30 hours.
James Jorman is president of the Lviv International Rotary Club. The American expat evacuated his family to Poland just days before the invasion. He and other Rotary members are now coordinating places to stay for refugees.
When we do hear of these stories, as best as we can, we try to connect the families that are fleeing with the families here that are welcome them to opening their homes to them.
And a UN official now warning this war could drive up to 5 million people total out of Ukraine into these Eastern European countries. In Washington, I'm Ryan Smith reporting.
And this week, the White House announcing its new plan for COVID-19, moving past the pandemic and into a more endemic stage of dealing with this virus. The administration's 4 goals include vaccinating more people, preparing for new variants, preventing more shutdowns, and also testing and treating COVID infections. The Test to Treat program, as it's known, would give people a COVID treatment pill like Paxlovid made by Pfizer as soon as they test positive for the virus.
Hundreds of one-stop sites will open across the country this month, located at local pharmacy clinics, community health centers.
Important to point out here that there is no guarantee that the plan will go through because it does require more funding from Congress. The administration reportedly asking for $22.5 billion for spending related to this plan to COVID-19 and also to prepare for future pandemics. Those funds would be part of the government's yearly funding bill. The next deadline to pass that is March 11th. Now, according to a Washington Post ABC News poll, most Americans feel that COVID is somewhat under control right now and support controlling the spread over no restrictions at all. But an AP Norc poll shows concern about COVID is very low right now. Only a quarter of Americans are worried about possible infection. And when it comes to mask mandates, just half of Americans are currently in favor of wearing masks. Right now, only the 3 states you see highlighted here, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii, still have indoor mask mandates in place. The governors of Washington and Oregon have already announced their indoor mask mandates will be lifted March 12th, but no word yet from Hawaii's governor on when he plans on doing the same. On Capitol Hill, we now know when the president's Supreme Court nominee will go before the U.S. Senate. Hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will be held March 22nd and 23rd. She started meeting with Senate leadership, including Senators Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, this past Wednesday. Jackson has 8 years of experience as a federal trial judge. She's currently on the U.S. Court of Appeals for Washington, D.C., and was appointed to that post by President Biden, confirmed by the Senate for that just last year with bipartisan support. The pandemic has given parents a deeper insight into what their children are learning in the classroom, bringing more attention to who's on local school boards. The National Desk Bren Krumholtz is taking a closer look at the school board races in his home state of Wisconsin, where some of those elections are now seeing more candidates than ever before.
It doesn't take advanced science to figure out one reason why Appleton is having its first school board primary election in 9 years. Last August perhaps paints the scene best when maskers and anti-maskers stood on opposite sides of the street ahead of a board meeting.
For years, I think school board service was maybe not as interesting for folks. But as board meetings were forced to go virtually, I think the accessibility to meetings and the engagement with what is happening certainly increased.
It's not just Appleton and its 9 candidates vying for 4 open board seats. 6 candidates vying for 2 seats have forced Oshkosh to have its first school board primary in 14 years.
It's their policy, it's their building. Okay?
And no, it's our building.
Last August, parents against a mask mandate disrupted the start of an Oshkosh school board meeting, causing it to be postponed.
But I think in the last year or two, it has, like everything else in American life, including COVID, become completely politicized, or tremendously politicized.
Lawrence University history professor Gerald Poder points to last November's gubernatorial election in Virginia as a prime example of how education has risen in the ranks for voters.
If you had told me 2 years ago that a Virginia's governor or a governor's race in any state in this country would turn basically because of what went on in school boards, I wouldn't have believed you.
Poder says politics is fueling more people to run for school boards and will likely bring more people to the polls.
COVID seems to be number one. When you look at the candidate statements, that's usually the first thing they talk about. But they don't necessarily talk about it in a direct way, and I guess that's politics.
Potential proof that COVID is a driver can be seen in the number of school board primaries pre- and post-pandemic. In Brown County, there are 3 school board primary races on Tuesday. Last year, the first school board races of the pandemic, there were 4. In the 10 years prior, there were never more than 2 school board primaries in 1 year in Brown County, and that only happened twice.
There are weeks that you feel like that's all you do is school board work.
Kay Eggert has been on Appleton's school board for nearly 19 years. She says the time commitment likely kept people away in the past. As for politics, Eggert says it is becoming a factor, even financially.
There's nothing illegal about that. It's not, I mean, it's just what it is.
How much are you seeing that this race compared to previous races?
I think there is more of it evident this year, but I don't think it's unique to Appleton. I really do believe that it is across the state and really across the country.
Poder says he hasn't noticed political money in the area's school board races yet. However, it wouldn't surprise him after primaries. But he says that isn't just about COVID.
Critical race theory, or the idea of critical race theory being taught in the schools, that gives parents a focus, something to look at, something to concentrate on and to argue about. That's much different than arguing in a more abstract and vague way about, well, what should we be teaching in the schools? This gives it a focus, and I think that brings out interest, brings out candidates.
And likely will bring out voters.
That was Ben Krumholtz reporting. Coming up, the president's promise to slow the price of gas. But can he keep it? Our fact-check team looking into what the president says and if it's possible. Plus, a different reason for empty store shelves. A look at what some small businesses are doing to support the people of Ukraine. You're watching The National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We're back after this.
The National Desk, team of reporters bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and tonight we start in Washington, where crime continues to plague the streets of downtown Seattle.
This video from the owners of Piroshki, a bakery near 3rd and Pike, shows a glimpse of what they're seeing outside every day. And the owner of International Cigar and Tobacco, which is just a few doors down, says it's the very reason they now close several hours early. The owner, Amir Yusuf, says recently this block has seen a jump in gun violence, drug use, and has become a market for stolen goods.
Every night we see fights. Everybody is just threatening, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you.
This afternoon, one person was shot to death nearby. Surveillance footage shows people running, trying to take cover. Last Monday night, a man was shot in the face. He says now he sees more criminal activity there since 12th and Jackson, a notorious hotspot, was cleared more than a week ago. A mobile police unit was set up. We reached out to the mayor's office to see if there's a similar plan for 3rd and Pine. In a statement to Como News, a spokesperson said, in part, quote, replicating promising early results from 12th and Jackson requires concentrated effort to show noticeable improvement in the short term and a comprehensive approach in the long term.
In Nevada, a nonprofit raising money to get victims of sex trafficking off the streets. Refuge for Women fundraising for an emergency house to give women a safe place to go no matter their circumstance. They hope to get women away from their abusers so they can focus on getting their freedom back.
These people prey on their vulnerabilities and make them think that no one cares. No one's going to miss you if you're gone, or they threaten to harm their families.
Refuge for Women says 92% of victims return to their abuser because they have nowhere else to go. And in Rhode Island, 2 liquor stores no longer selling Russian liquor products. The owners of Patriot Wine and Spirits and 1776 Liquors say this is their way of supporting the Ukrainian people during the Russian invasion. They're instead encouraging customers to buy American-made liquors and have had a positive response from customers so far.
It's better to do something, even if it's a symbolic something, than to do nothing at all.
The 2 owners are hoping more Rhode Island businesses follow suit.
During his State of the Union address on Tuesday, President Biden announced his plan to reduce the price at the pump as the national average hit $3.65 a gallon. Our fact-check team investigates whether what he rolled out truly impacts everyday Americans.
President Biden announcing last night that the U.S. and 30 other countries will release 60 million barrels of oil from the reserves, 30 million of those barrels coming from right here in the United States. So Janae Bowens joining me here for tonight's Fact Check. And Janae, we have seen this move before here in the U.S., but the big question tonight, how effective is it?
It's not really that effective, Ryan. The president released 50 million barrels of oil from our reserve last year. Those efforts only put a small and temporary dent in what we paid at the pump. Prices went down a few cents, but quickly rebounded just a few weeks later. Now, I found that last year, the U.S. consumed an average of almost 20 million barrels of oil a day. So that 30 million barrels of oil just from the U.S. wouldn't even cover 2 days here. Now, experts and critics say these releases are not the cure to high gas prices. The country needs a more sustained supply increase. Now, as of February 25th, we have a total of 580 million barrels of oil in our reserves.
And Janae, it's important to point out here, the big topic last night, of course, was Russia's attack on Ukraine. And you found out the U.S. is still receiving some of its oil supply from Russia.
Yeah, and there are bipartisan calls tonight to ban Russian imports of oil, which is more than 12 million barrels in December, but no action has been taken.
Parents of transgender children investigated for child abuse. The rule now facing a legal setback when a final decision could be made. And the Ukrainian people fighting for their country. Next, we talk to a member of the Ukrainian parliament about the efforts to drive Russian troops out. You're watching the National Desk. The Russian attack on Ukraine has been going on for more than a week now, and the Ukrainian people are fighting back. This week, a Ukrainian city releasing this video showing hundreds of people blocking the entrance to the nation's largest nuclear power plant. They were using garbage trucks and sandbags to keep Russian troops out. The mayor of that city saying that, quote, no one will surrender. On Thursday, our Jan Jeffcoat spoke to Ukrainian parliament member Alexei Goncharenko, who is in Kyiv, about the resistance and what he's witnessing.
There are bombings. Humanitarian situation is very difficult, very bad. and they are bombing kindergartens, hospitals, schools, universities, maternity houses. So it's absolutely genocide in the 21st century in the middle of Europe. That's the situation. But we're standing strong. Just minutes ago, there was a meeting of Ukrainian parliament, and we made some new laws which are important for our army and for the society at that moment. So we believe that we will win, and really we are fighting for our home and for the whole free world.
How far away are they from where you are located right now? Do you know?
I think 25, 30 kilometers.
And what are you doing at this moment? This must be, I can't imagine what this is like for you. This is so surreal to see civilians taking on Putin's army. I know many Ukrainians feel like this is their duty to protect their family, even if this means giving the ultimate sacrifice. And I understand you guys have stocked up on weapons as well.
Yes, I am also joined Civic Guard, civilian militia. With the weapons in my hands, I'm ready to fight for Kiev if it will be needed. For the moment, the situation in Kiev is calm, but everything can change. And if occupant will enter the city, we will fight with occupants on the streets, and we'll make hell here for them.
Wow! And you said 25 kilometers. You believe they're about 25 kilometers away, which is about 21 miles. As I'm talking to you, I can't. Your demeanor is so calm right now. What are you feeling at this moment?
There was at the beginning, the first days, there were a lot of concerns. Certainly that's true. But now it's like, decisive mood. So I understand that we need to fight, and I'm sure that we will win. The moral of people is very high. People in the cities where occupants entered the cities, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, they use just cocktails of Molotov against tanks. So it is all society which is fighting, not only army. And that's why I'm sure that we will win. It couldn't be another way when the whole society is so united. We want to protect our home because we don't have any other home and any other land. So that is our position. But also, you need to understand that if Putin would be successful here, he will go further. He's not going to stop. It's a real aggressor. And in reality, the Third World War already started. So we are now on the frontier, and we hope very much that our partners will help us to fight and to win.
And there's so much bad information that we're hearing and that we're seeing right now, including the fact that Putin's trying to take out all forms of communication, which clearly is not working. Can you talk us through what you're hearing from other Ukrainians who are on the streets right now fighting? People are ready, because many people, especially women, children, elderly people, they left Kiev and other cities which are in fighting or close to fighting. Many people are in the western part of Ukraine, which is calm now. So near 1 million refugees crossed the border. So that's the situation. But tens and tens of thousands of Ukrainians took weapons in their arms. Doctors, teachers, IT specialists, managers, just civilians, just ordinary civilians. But we feel that we need to do this because we need to stop the enemy. And what they are doing with these old bombings of residential areas, of using vacuum bombs, which is most powerful weapon after nuclear. They already use it against us. In Kharkiv, for example, that's the second biggest city in Ukraine, 1.5 million people. That's something which makes us especially angry. And we understand that we are fighting not only just for independence, but for our lives.
Incredible. We also asked him what else he thinks could be done to stop Vladimir Putin and what he wants Americans to know about the resilience of the Ukrainian people. You can see that entire interview on our website, thenationaldesk.com. The numbers show violent crime on the rise in cities all across America. Coming up, a look at the efforts to cut down on carjackings that's going all the way to Capitol Hill. And we are back with a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. The small town of Englewood, Tennessee, outraged after a woman is charged with abusing 9 high school boys. 38-year-old Melissa Blair is out on bond. Officials say any other victims should come forward. A Russian-born entrepreneur is offering a $1 million bounty for Putin's arrest. Alex Konanikin posted the bounty on his social media on a wanted poster. And a mystery animal found in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, has been identified by DNA as 100% coyote. It's kind of cute. It was rescued when a woman found it injured on her property. All these stories and more posted right now on thenationaldesk.com. Check them out. The police officer charged with endangering Breonna Taylor's neighbor in the raid that killed the 26-year-old black woman was found not guilty. In 2020, a grand jury indicted former officer Brett Hankinson with wanton endangerment. The only officer to be charged, police say Hankinson fired 10 shots into Taylor's neighbor's apartment, where 2 adults and a child were inside. No officers have been held criminally liable for Taylor's death. Iowa has joined the other Republican-led states in passing legislation that only allows student athletes to participate in teams matching the gender on their birth certificates. Critics say the bill isolates transgender children, but supporters say it protects biologically born female athletes from unfair competition. A Texas judge has temporarily blocked a rule that would investigate parents of transgender children for child abuse. A family with a trans daughter filed the lawsuit with the ACLU this week, days after Governor Greg Abbott signed the investigation order.
Instead of actually having a policy and promoting a policy that promotes the well-being and health of children, instead, the Texas governor and the commissioner of the Child Welfare Agency have taken the opposite tack to specifically target transgender youth and their parents that are supporting them.
A second hearing on this later this month will decide if Abbott's order should be ruled unconstitutional altogether. Still ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now.
The terrifying crime of carjacking on the rise in almost every major city. I'm Christine Frizzau in Washington with a look at why some on Capitol Hill say it may be time for the federal government to step in.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now, and here are a few stories we're following for you. All eyes on Ukraine as Russia continues its attack on the country. More than 1.2 million Ukrainians have fled, and humanitarian efforts are underway to help those who've stayed behind. February delivering a stronger than expected jobs report. U.S. employers adding 678,000 jobs last month, and the national unemployment rate now at 3.8%, the lowest since just before the start of the pandemic. And looking ahead, the House and Senate racing against time once again, working to pass a short-term spending bill before the March 11th deadline. Carjackings are rising at an alarming rate in major cities across the country. The problem's so severe, the president may need to call on Congress to step in. The National Desk's Christine Frizzell reports.
A horrific scene unfolding on city streets across America, including in the nation's capital, where this city council candidate was a recent victim.
When I saw 4 masked men pulling up quickly, I mean, the gun was out in my face. So I had my keys in my hand, just threw them up.
On Thursday, a candidate for governor in Maryland made this declaration in Baltimore.
Today, we're calling on the governor to declare a state of emergency in Baltimore City.
The rate of carjacking there up 58% over the last year, 286% in New York City, 238% in Philadelphia, and 207% in Chicago. Those committing the carjackings often juveniles. Dealing with violent crime for the most part falls at the feet of state and local government. But now some lawmakers in Washington say it may be time for them to step in.
This is not just a state and local issue. This is an organized crime issue, as this is an issue that goes beyond little local jurisdictions and one neighborhood's cop.
The committee has now asked the FBI to create a national database on carjackings. Other senators say direct action is needed and blame progressive policies in some cities for the steep rise.
Progressive prosecutors at the state level have told criminals that they won't get in trouble with certain crimes. Well, that won't fly with the federal government.
Several large cities have recently changed the laws. They say unfairly keep black and brown people locked up. But critics say it's been a domino effect of those same people going on to commit more violent crime because they don't feel there are consequences.
A lot of them believe that we should not prosecute misdemeanor crimes like shoplifting. They have the best intentions, but they often produce the worst results for the people that the same people that they're trying to help.
New ideas now coming forward on how to proceed.
Just as federal prosecutors and federal agents made bank robberies a priority, they should do the same thing for carjackings. It's affecting commerce and public safety nationwide.
Public safety under threat in a new and frightening way. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzell.
Ukraine is not a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Therefore, there's only so much the United States can do to help the country as it faces a Russian invasion. Well, this week, the fact-check team asked, why isn't Ukraine part of NATO?
NATO currently has 30 members. Their goal is to guarantee freedom and security for that alliance. Ukraine has expressed a desire to join NATO, but hasn't received membership. So tonight, our investigative producers looking into this topic for us tonight, Janae and Connor. Thank you for joining us tonight. Janae, we start with you. What did you find out?
So, Ryan, there has to be unanimous agreement among all members in order for a new country to join the alliance. And you have to meet certain political, economic, and military goals, things like fair treatment of minority populations and a democratic political system based on a market economy. Now, we actually found out that 14 years ago, the allies had agreed that Ukraine would be a member of NATO in the future. Ukraine had to follow a membership action plan and make some changes to seal the deal. But Ukraine fell short, and NATO decided Ukraine needed more reforms, such as addressing the country's political corruption in a way that ensures domestic stability. Now in 2022, we see Ukraine still hasn't done enough.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Janae. And in 2008, when President Bush called for Ukraine to become a member of NATO, both Germany and France pushed back, stating that Ukraine was still struggling to shift from socialism to democracy. In a 2021 analysis by Transparency International, an anti-corruption watchdog, Ukraine ranked as one of the most corrupt countries, far exceeding any existing NATO country. NATO members also worry Ukraine's membership would be an unnecessary offense to Russia. They want to make sure that Ukraine is ready legally and politically before escalating any tensions with Putin.
An important breakdown tonight from Connor and Janae. Thank you both for that.
The National Desk team of reporters bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, starting tonight in Washington, where one city's police department is creating a special task force targeting catalytic converter thefts.
It's scenes like this, a duo jacking up that car and in a matter of seconds swiping the catalytic converter off of the exhaust system that can end up costing people hundreds of dollars. The crime is skyrocketing.
We're here today to present a united front.
And on the east side, a task force has been created to deal with this mess, already making 11 arrests. Bellevue Police Chief Wendell Shirley says the city has seen a 580% increase in converter thefts, popular for the precious metals inside of them. In King County, there's an average of 4 thefts each day from individuals to more organized rings.
Clearly, to make the most impact, we want to touch the people that are moving a lot of catalytic converters, and that's why we're pooling our resources together to better attack that.
The 9-agency task force will share intel and investigate who's buying the stolen parts and where they go from there.
We need significant fines for those who accept the stolen product.
At the state legislature, 2 bills are aimed at the problem too. One that would create a statewide task force and another to penalize those metal recyclers should they buy stolen converters.
In Utah, drivers registering their vehicles at the DMV are leaving empty-handed as the state faces decal shortages. Lawmakers say they did anticipate this would happen, and they're setting up a virtual decal database which police can access. But some residents say they felt a little caught off guard by the shortage.
I came here, expected to walk out, put a sticker on my car, and done. Not exactly. Said it could be 1 week to 6 months. That's ridiculous.
State officials say they expect to ship the missing stickers out to drivers who complete registrations before mid-March. And in Rhode Island, a man there says his 12-cylinder Bentley is one of 1,500 cars now at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship carrying the luxury car sank Tuesday after catching fire and burning for days, taking many rare vehicles with it. This comes as Americans deal with supply chain issues and have made buying a vehicle almost impossible.
Any car loss is tough for the public. You can't get vehicles now. That was a great shipment of vehicles. Almost all of them were sold. And with the industry the way it is, everything's short and everything's short everywhere. So it's just tough.
The loss of those cars estimated to be around $800 million. Among the vehicles to sink with the ship were rare 12-cylinder Lamborghinis, the last to ever be made.
Still to come, Tuesday's State of the Union address brought praise from some and skepticism from others. We're getting the reaction from one of the president's staunchest critics, and our Capitol Hill team breaking down the speech with expert analysis. We're back after this break. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget you can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And anytime online on our website, thenationaldesk.com.
The team of 10 in our Washington bureau, our correspondents, our editors, our videographers, our producers, we blanket Washington and Capitol Hill every day to cover the issues important to you and how they impact you. Two of those correspondents are with us today. Scott Thuman, our chief political correspondent, and Atra Elnishar, our national correspondent. Scott, let's start with you. It was a big week in Washington. We had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, obviously, but also Joe Biden's State of the Union speech. What stuck out to you from his speech?
Well, a bit of a unique moment, Steve, something we don't see on Capitol Hill very often. Republicans jumping to their feet to applaud something the president said. It was during his speech that he said we should all agree that the answer is not to defund police, but to fund the police. And he doubled down. He said it twice again. The whole premise being that this is an issue that Democrats have been taking a big hit on in the polls and elections results because they've been seen, or at least portrayed, as a party that doesn't support law and order as much as they should. And so maybe this issue is being put to bed a little bit by the president coming out and forcefully saying we should fund the police. Republicans loved it. Most Democrats, but not all. You had Cori Bush, Congresswoman from Missouri, who lashed out at the president on Twitter afterwards, slamming him, saying, you didn't mention saving black lives once, defund the police. So it's not put to bed completely, but moving forward to the midterms, you've got to think the president wanted to put this off the table because they believe politically it really does hurt the Democratic Party moving forward.
Well, and as you mentioned, bipartisan in short supply in Washington these days. Atra, you covered a story this week where Democrats and Republicans did get together on an issue. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. It's really rare to see this kind of bipartisanship, especially on an energy issue. But that's what the devastation in Ukraine and the fact that there's no end in sight is doing. So what we're hearing are calls from Democrats, Republicans, folks in the center, in the House and Senate, who say it's time for President Biden to end imports of Russian oil into the United States. They say this would be the blow to Putin that he just can't take, to his energy sector, because these other tough sanctions clearly aren't ending their invasion of Ukraine. President Biden says there's nothing off the table, but they're wary of what this could do for gas prices, which are already high, right? If you cut off that kind of supply. There's also another catch here, Steve, and that is if the U.S. does this without Europe, what kind of impact would that actually have? The U.S. only buys less than 2% of Russia's energy exports. So unless Europe is also doing it, would it actually be much of a blow to Putin? And would someone else, another actor, another country, just buy that supply and he'd get that money anyway? We'll have to see how the president responds.
And you've been covering the spike in gas prices. What is your reporting? What are you hearing about gas prices moving forward and how it's going to affect the average American?
Right. So the spikes in prices we're seeing are still because of market reaction, panic, risk, not necessarily an actual impact of supply. But we are seeing prices go up 6 cents, 8 cents every single day. Some states are seeing an average of $4 a gallon. Gas Buddy's lead petroleum analyst Patrick DeHaan projects that the nationwide average for a gallon of gas 20 days from now will be $4 a gallon.
And Scott, let's look ahead to next week a little bit, focusing on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What is on your radar? What questions do you have about what's going to happen next week, and what are you really focused on?
Yeah, I want to see what the international community is willing to do to try and stop Putin as he continues to progress. You saw the big development with taking power over a nuclear power station in Ukraine and ramping up a lot of the worries there. We had this tweet from Lindsey Graham that it really kind of the toughest language we've heard yet so far as particular punishments may go. He said, is there a Brutus in Russia? A little bit of a Julius Caesar reference there, saying the only way to end this is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You'd be doing your country and the world a great service. Some Republicans pushing back, saying that is warmongering, puts us in a bad position. It's a terrible idea. Ted Cruz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they push back. But I spoke with Kurt Volker, the former special envoy to Ukraine. He said there's no telling how far Putin wants to go. He thinks he wants to go well beyond Ukraine's borders. And there was a phone call between France's president, Emmanuel Macron, and Putin. Lasted 90 minutes. He came away from it thinking that the worst is yet to come. So what is the international community willing to do to go beyond possible sanctions against oligarchs, against Putin, against the banking system? Would they ever go this far, or is that leading to World War III? Who knows? But anyway, I'm going to keep a close eye on that one. I'm sure we'll have more reporting next week on it.
Scott Thuman, our chief political correspondent, and Atra Elnishar, our national correspondent. Thank you both. Eugene, back to you.
And a big thanks to our Capitol Hill team breaking it all down for us. Coming up on the National Desk, America's News Now.
we're going to be vulnerable yet again to another variant unless we vaccinate the world.
Scientists turn their attention to vaccine access, the American doctor leading that charge. But first, is the president's agenda being held hostage by his own party? We ask Congressman Jim Jordan next in 90 seconds.
The State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong.
This week, President Biden giving his first State of the Union address, promising to support Ukraine in the Russian invasion, move to the next phase of the COVID pandemic, and also slow record inflation. Polls from several news outlets had a mostly positive reaction to the president's speech. A CNN poll finding 71% of people had positive reactions, 29% had negative reactions to the president's words, and 67% of people in the CBS YouGov poll said the speech made them feel, quote, optimistic. 53% felt proud, and just 32% said they felt safe. However, Republican members of Congress say it's the administration's own policies that caused the country's issues in the first place. Our Jan Jeffcoat spoke to Congressman Jim Jordan the morning after the speech. Here's his take.
It just doesn't make sense that he says the state of our nation is strong. I mean, you think about it, we got record crime, record inflation, record illegal crossings, 2 million in 1 year. We got the terrible situation in Ukraine, which follows what happened last summer with the exit that the debacle that was the exit from Afghanistan. So in so many places, frankly, Jada, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, he actually said we need to secure the border. This after a year of intentionally leaving the border open. 2 million, record number, 2 million illegals crossed into our country last year. So I thought there were just so many parts of the speech that frankly didn't make sense. And I always say there's a reason that 63% of the country thinks our nation is on the wrong track. My guess is after last night's speech, that number is higher. And that's not, I get no satisfaction in saying that, but that's just the state of things as they are right now in our great country.
And the world's certainly looking for America's leadership to send this bold, strong message to Vladimir Putin. I want you to take a listen to what New York Congressman Paul Tonka had to say after the speech.
I think it was a very strong speech that showed America's strength from Ukraine, responding to Russia, making certain that we provide assistance. It's good to hear the president calling for more resources to defend freedom through the conflict that is facing Ukraine. I think also the strength that we showed in bringing together the free world. That was a great tone established.
Well, you heard Congressman Tonko there. He said it was a great tone that was established. What'd you think?
Well, I do think it's been good that America has rallied and other countries around the world are rallying to the support of Ukraine. Obviously, the leadership, the courageous leadership of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people has just been amazing to watch as they deal with this evil that's coming from Russia. But I would step back and say, I don't think this happens. In fact, it didn't happen when President Trump was president because he projected strength from the Oval Office. And with Joe Biden, unfortunately, we're seeing just the opposite. We see weakness. And when you project weakness as commander-in-chief and from the Oval Office, bad guys around the world are going to do bad things. And we are seeing that as, we're seeing that play out as we speak in Ukraine.
A lot of experts, including yourself, politicians included, have called for the U.S. to become more energy independent as a result of what we're seeing with Russia and how so many European countries are so reliant as well on Russia for their energy. What steps do we need to take here in the U.S. to become more independent when it comes to this?
Well, reverse the crazy policies of the Biden administration. They shut off the Keystone Pipeline. They won't let, they closed ANWR. They're not going to let oil and gas companies drill on federal lands. I mean, so you just got to do 180 degrees opposite of what this administration has done. But here's the problem. Even if Joe Biden wanted to do that, his party won't let him. His party is controlled by the left. The left actually wants to destroy the oil and gas industry. I mean, we had a hearing a few months ago where my Democrat colleague, Ro Khanna, said in that hearing with executives from the oil and gas companies, he went down the line and badgered each witness and said, will you pledge today to decrease production? I mean, think about that. I asked him after his comments and after his questioning, I said, what do you guys want, $8 gas? And the truth is, they do. They want to drive the oil and gas business out of business. And it just shows how out of touch they are. So it'd been nice if Joe Biden would reverse policies, but I don't think he can, because the radical left controls his party. The same radical left that's for defunding the police, in spite of what Joe Biden said last night, the same radical left that says we shouldn't have any bail requirements for bad guys, and prosecutors who don't want to prosecute people that given this record level of crime, the same radical left that says we should have open borders. So he might want to change, who knows, but his party won't let him.
And the congressman also talked about the president's claims of bipartisanship and the upcoming midterm elections. You can watch that entire interview posted right now on thenationaldesk.com. The fight against the next COVID variant already underway. Coming up, our Spotlight on America team asking the doctor leading the charge, is it already too late? A team of Texas researchers has taken a huge step forward in the global battle against COVID-19. National investigative correspondent Josie Sturman talked with the doctor leading the charge to create a low-cost, easily produced shot that he hopes will better protect the world from the next variant.
The COVID-19 vaccine has been a literal shot in the arm in the battle against coronavirus. The CDC says 65% of Americans have been fully vaccinated. Cases are on the decline, and anyone who wants the shot can find it pretty much anywhere across the nation. But around the globe, vaccines can be hard to come by, and that's a problem Dr. Peter Hotez is trying to solve.
Hopefully this can fill the horrible inequality gap that's out there to vaccinate the world.
Hotez is co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development at Baylor College of Medicine. His team has made a monumental breakthrough, creating a cheap, easy-to-produce vaccine that could help millions of low- and middle-income people worldwide.
So it's a vaccine that uses a technology that's made locally across the world, including Brazil and Bangladesh and Vietnam and India and China, and so that if you have that technology to make a COVID-19 vaccine, it could be made locally and scaled to the billions and billions of doses, and that's what we've done.
What they've done is based on the building blocks of a vaccine Hotez first talked about with Spotlight on America back in March of 2020 at the start of the pandemic. He told us then his team had been working on it years before COVID-19 hit, but didn't move forward to clinical trials because of funding.
Is it too late for them to use what you've already developed and researched?
No, I think now we could still repurpose our vaccine.
Operation Warp Speed offered new hope.
It will end the pandemic, and we're working with other nations.
But Hotez says the program, while successful in funding quick development of a shot to help Americans, didn't factor in what was needed to scale up globally. So his team created a vaccine that could, using private money for public good. And there's no patent, no strings attached. So once it's globally approved, it can be distributed to the masses for as little as $2 a dose.
We can join a very cool group of individuals being able to make a difference in the world.
Hotez and his partner could also join another cool group. In early February, Texas Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher nominated the pair for the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to develop a low-cost COVID-19 vaccine and make it available to all. She also joined with a group of bipartisan lawmakers asking the Biden administration to help distribute the accessible vaccine, saying variants like Omicron and Delta that originate in other countries will continue to threaten our own domestic health, security, and full economic recovery.
Why is it so important to roll out something that can be used globally?
And the reason is because we do not have enough vaccine for the African continent, and that's how Omicron arose out of southern Africa, out of an unvaccinated population. So aside from the obvious humanitarian reason to vaccinate the world is the fact that it's in our own enlightened self-interest. We're going to be vulnerable yet again to another variant unless we vaccinate the world.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Josie Sturman.
Now, the technology needed to make that vaccine has already been licensed to 4 countries, with others pending. And that does it for us for this weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us weekdays live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and, of course, catch up with all the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Eugene Ramirez. Have a great rest of your weekend.